Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Scott Smithson. I'll just go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about managing tariffs in CloudSuite, as Shane said. Now, I'm going to go through a little, do a little intro here, but the rough agenda that we're going to talk about today is I'm going to talk a little bit about what tariffs are and some of the, history of how CloudSuite and its predecessors have handled it very briefly. And then I'm going to discuss a little bit about tariffs versus add-ons, but the main focus of this conversation today is going to be about tariffs. I'm going to assume most of you know how to use PO add-ons, and if you don't, please reach out to your partner, your consultants to get more information on that. I'll go through the setups, and then we'll do a process flow. And then, through that, I've got most of this information in the PowerPoint. However, I will demo this. So towards the end of the process flow, I'll go ahead and take a step back and actually bring up CloudSuite and show this to you. And then we're going to talk about some other considerations. So first and foremost, I think that y'all should know that the functionality related to tariffs is not new in CloudSuite. It has been around since the trend days. When I was an end user, I worked for an importer. I actually imported pipe, and I used this functionality. Now, in the intervening years, in the GUI years, and in version 10 or somewhere around there, they started integrating this also with country of origin. So if you're still on character, you're going to be using some, a pretty older solution. But in the newer versions of GUI and in all the web versions on-prem or otherwise, the functionality that I'm describing to you is as I'm showing. All right, the screenshots I'm going to show you are not GUI, but if you're on, SX, web version 11, this functionality it's good. The screens are going to be the same. All right. And we'll talk about some other considerations like passing charges on to your customers and some of the questions that we've received recently. Now, I want to define tariff and HST, not so much how the dictionary defines it, but in terms of this conversation. So a tariff is just going to be a duty, tax, or fee, money levied on an imported product. All right. And as opposed to freight charges or brokerage fees and all of those things. Now, HST and HTS, you'll see it in both ways. The US government's harmonized tariff schedule uses HTS. HST, I'm not sure how that acronym came about. I believe it's the French order. Now, that is code. It's specific format, but it's a code applied to a group of products for the purpose of calculating a tariff. So, for example, aluminum pipe might have its own code, or buttons, or what have you. So, all right. Now, I want to jump right into the conversation about add-ons and tariffs, and this has come up because there are an awful lot of companies out there that would be tempted to use PO add-ons instead of the tariff logic. And this has some pros and cons. So, and one of the biggest pros is that add-ons are familiar. And that's not a bad, it's not a bad thing, all right? However, tariffs have a more narrow and specified functionality. So, and there are some drawbacks to using add-ons. So if you are in the type of business where you have products on the same purchase order that have different tariff codes, then add-ons are not appropriate. So add-ons apply the same logic to all of the products on the PO. So it's either by weight, it's allocated by weight, or by cube, or by dollar. Tariffs are percentage of the cost, and it can be different from product to product. So if you end up applying the same formula to all of the products, you could be running into some compliance issues. So, using the tariff logic in those situations is definitely something that you probably want to consider. Now, there's a key difference in how capitalized PO add-ons are manifested in the cost versus tariff. So a capitalized add-on will average into your add-on cost in the product warehouse, so ICSW. That's pretty normal. Those of you who are using capitalized add-ons, that's an everyday occurrence. All right. Tariffs update average cost. Now, if you're using FIFO, it's updating FIFO layer. And if you're using standard cost, it's not updating standard cost. It's going to go to a write-off account or a variance account. However, the majority of companies that are in hard goods distribution tend to use average cost. So, or some version of that. So tariffs just go straight into average cost. You're not going to be able to segment it out. Now, the accruals, so when a receipt occurs, the accrual for add-ons is to the uninvoiced add-on account. Or if you're combining it with uninvoiced inventory, it'll be there. So it has its own subledger. GLRBP is the acronym. Most of you would be used to that if you're using add-ons. However, tariffs do not accrue to what's technically a subledger in CloudSuite. It uses a GL liability account. And then when you're paying the bill with add-ons, you're matching it to an add-on type of record in accounts payable. If you're using tariffs, you're going to be expensing the portion of that GL liability. I do wish to point out that the way vendors and brokers and whoever charge and bill you for tariffs, there's a wide variety of things out there. I've seen it as a lump sum. I've seen it embedded into the cost of the material. I've seen it as a, separate line item charges. It's all over the place. So I want to caution everybody that before you make a decision about how you set up tariffs and whether you use them at all, you really do want to know how you're billed for them too, because you could end up making more work for yourself by choosing what might seem like an amazing solution in the beginning. All right, so I'm putting my consultant hat on here and just reminding everybody that you got to talk to all your departments. All right. So the next thing I'm going to kind of do is run through some of the preliminary setups. So using the tariff setup requires a couple preliminary things that you need to do. One of them is to set up a general ledger liability account. All right. And so that's just in general ledger setup account. Now, remember, if you're fully divisionalized or if you're breaking it up with partial divisionalization, you do need to make sure that it exists in all of your divisions. But if you're partial divisionalized, you could hard map that to one division, right? You need to set up countries. Now, you don't have to set up every country in the world. Most people don't do business with that many countries. However, if you have a lot of them and you don't feel like keying them in, I just want to remind everybody that you can set up countries with the data conversion, SASTT. So it's pretty simple to do, but it's not typically necessary. So those are the two primary setups that you want to make sure exist before you go and try to set up a tariff code. Now, and I will demo this next part after I'm done running through the slides. So the acronym for setting up a tariff is under SASGT, System Administrator Setup Government Tariffs, if you want to know what those stand for. If you're in CloudSuite or the web version of SX, if you just type in tariff, you're going to find it. But there are 4 primary fields. This is what the grid looks like when you access it. But if you click new, you'll see that there's your harmonized system tariff code and the country of origin, your duty rate percentage, and the general ledger account. Now, it's got a 00 in my division space because I am fully divisionalized in the version that I use. You may see it as hard-coded on yours. So a couple things I'd like to point out about setting up tariffs is they can be loaded with the data conversion tools. So that acronym, for those of you who have the CloudSuite or on-prem web it's DCSCH, and you can get those layouts from your partner or drop us a note. I can send that to you. There is no yet mass update function for tariffs in this day and age, because tariffs are not only an issue, but they're also an unstable issue. It is going to be necessary to update them more frequently than it has been in the past. In fact, there was one day a couple of weeks ago where tariffs on one specific type of product changed 3 times during the same day. All right. And so this is a relevant issue. And so for those of you that have IT staffs who can handle data conversions, this is something that you probably want to investigate, or if you need people to be trained. I have to give you a warning about data conversions, as they are a very powerful tool. And if you haven't been trained on them, please seek that training. And also, for the love of everything, be sure you use your import ID, because you don't want to accidentally be deleting every tariff code in the system if you only need to handle a few. All right. I'm going to move on to the next page. So a couple other setups that are once you get your tariff code set up and your country of origins existing, your vendor records, and if you use them, ship from records, need to have the country loaded in the, underneath the address field. I didn't include a screenshot of that. Now, they aren't technically used in the tariff calculation, but when you're writing a PO for tariffable products, the country of origin on the vendor, the address, needs to match the line items. Otherwise, it won't calculate. All right. Now, another important bigger picture setup is the product line. So I do not recommend that you leave the product line blank for product lines that have tariffable products. And I also don't recommend that you mingle tariffable products with non-tariffable products. As a result, you may need to set up multiple product lines, and you may need to learn how to consolidate them at some point. All right. That's all standard functionality that you could learn if you chose to. So on the tax tab of the product line, there are 2 fields. I've highlighted them in blue here. It's of the tariff code in the country of origin. Again, it's HS code on the screen. One thing you will notice is that the labeling convention on the various screens is inconsistent when it comes to tariff code. You'll see HST code, HS code, tariff code, duty. So it's all the same field. I can't, explain why on that one. Now, the important thing about putting it in on a product line isn't just the normal functionality for the tax tab on product lines of, filling out setting the new system defaults for product warehouse records. It is also used by non-stock. So when you write a non-stock line item, and usually that starts from the sales order side. However, the tied line item on the purchase order will use the tariff code from the product line record, unless it's catalog record, and then it will use the catalog record. All right. This is handy because tariffs do interact with non-stocks quite effectively. Then the next 2 screens I'm going to talk about are the product master and the product warehouse. And so I've highlighted where the tariff code is on the country of origin for the product master. And in a lot of ways, that's a convenience, because it's the product warehouse record that matters the most. So on the taxing tab of the ICSW record, I've highlighted where the harmonized system tariff code is and the country of origin. And this is what is really used to default your purchase order line. All right. So this has to be right. Now, in purchase orders, when you are creating a purchase order, there's a couple fields, you can see the tariff code as the line items get created. It's in extended view by default. You may have personalized it into oblivion, so be sure that you look around for that if you don't see it, because we strongly encourage people to use personalizations and to clean up their screens, and only until recently have tariff codes become relevant for the average distributor. So pay a little bit of attention to that if you don't see it right away. And certainly if you're going to be using them a lot, I do strongly encourage you to move those fields up to where, the main part of the PO. Now, when you're adding PO lines, you'll notice in a little bit when I demo this that the country of origin and harmonized system code are also editable. So if you do have situations where you're creating a purchase order, and you maybe have a non-tariffable line or one with a different code, you can edit it. Now, you should not be editing the country of origin to be a different country than where the purchase order is coming from. So one recommendation I would make to most people is if you do have a vendor that has a location in India and a location in Taiwan, you can't mingle those products on the same purchase order, but you could have different ship froms. And you just want to be sure that you select the appropriate ship from. And then over here on the right, I'm showing you where it shows up on the screen if you care. Okay. And then there are plenty of, there's some considerations here also. The transactional data. So if a clean purchase order without a lot of other falderall on there, you could have add-ons and stuff like that and PO whole order discounts and all of that interacts with tariffs. But a purchase order with only tariffs on it, you would have your debit to your inventory account and then your credit to your uninvoiced inventory or AP clearing or whatever you choose to call it, that liability account that represents the material received that you haven't yet paid for. And then you'll have a tariffs payable accrual to the liability account that you establish in the tariff setup, SASGT. And then also the journal entry that is occurring in the background is, causing average cost just to be updated. So when we all want to see general ledger, I am after all finance consultant. So now under accounts payable, the scenarios that you run into in accounts payable can be quite varied, but fundamentally, all right, APE, this is an expense transaction. So if you're using tariffs, the liability is received through using the expense screen in accounts payable in a normal situation. Of course, you could make a case for journal entries too, if you're paying these in different ways. However, if you're using, if you're just being billed for the tariff all by itself, if you actually act as your own broker, this may be a scenario that comes up. You probably would just only need to use an expense payable for that. But most of the time, you're being billed for tariffs as part of a different set of invoices. It might be from your broker, it might be from your vendor, it might be from some guy named Joe down the street. However, you're often paying for the line items at the same time, so you would be putting it in as a normal trade payable, but the tariff amount would be documented on the expense screen in accounts payable. Now, a few other places I just want to point out is, after you do the receipt, you can see tariff information in various screens. So here I've shown where it is in PO inquiry, and then this is line item detail. And the line history under line item detail, it's visible in both of those places. Here it's on my screen, it's on the right and there. And, I do recommend that if you are going to use these, you want to try to come up with some way to make it, visible. So this is information that people will definitely want to see. Certainly your controller or CFO will, and your buyers. In product transaction detail and under ICIP transactions, and also in a journal entry in the inventory tab, if you drill into it, it's in the same place. I've highlighted where those would be on the screen by default if you're using those, as well as the exchange rate and other things if you're using foreign currency, and tariffs do interact with foreign currency too. And then here's a screenshot of the GLRA report, and I'll run this too in a little bit. I tend to recommend GLRA if you're going to use a canned report for this. Now, there is no subledger like APRT or GLRBP for these, so that this functionality, with this is limited, and you'll need to definitely work with your accounting department, controller, or whoever needs to in order to figure out what you've received versus what you've remitted. And this is not a minor conversation. So this is something that you do definitely need to work out. So, okay. Now I'll come back to the other considerations after I do the demo because they're pretty relevant. And so I'm going to pull up CloudSuite here. And again, if you're still on-premises, version 11 web, you have the ability to do this too. All right. So this is tariff rate setup. And, it's pretty easy to set up tariff code. I'm just going to go ahead and click new. And, you would establish what the code is. Now, these codes actually are established by, um, they're established by not really government, but by the World Trade Organization, I think. However, there is a website where you can download what they are and how the U.S. government establishes what they are. And I'll put a link. I've got a link in the end of on the last page of this a PowerPoint to this location. This has changed a lot in the last few weeks. So I've seen, so this is something that you definitely want to download. If you're going to start figuring these out and research what these are on your own, you always want the most current version of this. It's a pretty dynamic situation right now. Now, I'm just going to put in a random number just to show you how this works. I'm not going to use this one later, but you establish your country of origin after you fill that out. And I'll just go ahead and pick on Brazil here, and we'll go ahead and put in a percentage. And this is something that's going to be changing on everybody all the time. And then I'll pick my general ledger account. So, and if you are fully divisionalized, when you save that, it'll just do its normal thing with the, zeroing out that GL account to represent a variable. Now, if you're fully divisionalized, you do need to put in your division. Or if you're partially divisionalized, excuse me, you need to put in your division. And really, that's all it takes to set up a tariff code. So if you had 50 of them, you probably could whip through them quickly this way. But if you had, there's no reason to do that manually if you don't need to. You can use the data conversion tools to upload these. All right, which I personally have in several customers over the years. All right, so once that's established, and I'm assuming you all know, I mean, the controllers and the finance people on this call know how to set up a general ledger account. That needs to be done before you do this, unless you enjoy reconciling suspense entries. So I'm sure everybody jumps for joy when they have to do that. SASTT is where you set up countries. Most places do have countries already set up to some extent. However, it is right here in SASTT. I'll just go to country codes, and these are the ones I have set up. And there's really nothing to setting up a country code. I do recommend that you use the ANSI country code, 2 letters. That's something you could look up, although the tariff system doesn't care about that. As long as the record's there, the record's there. All right. Now, some of the higher level setups, not product specific, I'll just briefly show you where on a vendor record the country field is. And please, for the vendors that do tariffs, it's not a good idea to leave that blank. Otherwise, you'll be editing the header of POs. So it's right here, just right under the address. Same position with ship froms. If you use them, be sure those are filled in as well. Then product line, that's ICSL for those of you who know acronyms. And here on the tax tab, this is where that's filled in right there. And I'm going to use this product line for the product that I set up in a minute. However, it's and then on, so now I'm just going to go ahead and set up a new product. Now I've been using copper nickel pipe because that's something that was near and dear to my heart when I was an end user. And I've already got several set up. But I'm going to set up a new one and kind of show you how it works. So, but if you drill into one of my products here and click edit, you will see, they are set up. And I'm going to stick with the same tariff code that I've been using for the other demo. So I'm just going to copy that just so I don't have to memorize it. I'll just go ahead and set up a new product. So we'll use the same type of product just because I'm a little bit uptight about these things. And we'll just say it's that. And then I'm just going to give it a product category that's not really part of this conversation and the unit of measure. Now, we'll give it a, And I did look up what the tariff code was for copper nickel pipe, by the way, before this. So now down here is where I have my tariff codes located, and I'm going to use that one there. You can use the lookup for these if you choose, and then we'll go ahead and say my country of origin is India, because that's where my vendor is. Most people right now are kind of working through different countries that are being tariffed at this point. I just chose India on a whim. Okay. Now, I did want to point out a little bit that if you do look at my tariff setup, that it is possible to have the same tariff code with different countries of origin, and that is actually very, very common. So I forgot to mention when I was over on the tariff setup, if you did notice my screen, you will notice that I have the same 3 tariff codes, but with 3 different countries. So the tariffs for copper nickel pipe are very different if you're buying them from Canada than if you're buying copper nickel pipe from wherever else. So lots of copper nickel pipe comes from Quebec. So at least it used to when I was buyer. All right. So I've set up my product. So I'm going to just go ahead and set up the product warehouse record, ICSW, and we'll go ahead and just click new. I'll just fill that in. I am a big fan of using the most recently used on these because I am too lazy to type these things out. And I'll just go ahead and give this a cost. This is a cost per foot, so you should notice that it's relatively expensive in my world. And I'll just go ahead and put in a price just because that's the right thing to do. But let's go ahead, and if we scroll down, you'll see on the taxing tab, I'm sorry, you'll see that it is pre-filled out. I could change this. It is totally normal to have different tariff codes under the same product line. The product line is choosing the default. However, it's, products are being reassigned to different codes all of the time. And this is one of those fields that may become unstable because of external factors where suddenly purple Donald Duck shaped buttons had their own tariff code, right? And, that would be an interesting problem to have, but it is a real problem in some areas. So now I'll just go ahead and save that, and then I'll go ahead and pull that product up here on the screen, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy it out to my other warehouses because that's how I like to operate things. Obviously, you'll choose how you do those things yourself. Okay. All right, now the product is set up. It's really, fundamentally, it's not a huge complicated thing to get set up, but it's the use of them that can be complicated. It's the rules that are imposed upon us that are complicated. And it's managing it that, you need to think through. So I'm now going to run through some transactions to show you the consequences of what I've done. So now I didn't point out to you that when I set this up, what the cost of the product was. I think I made it 125, but let's make a mental note of that. So let me just jump into my Seattle warehouse here, and my average cost is $125 per foot. All right, I have 0 on hand, so it is no longer valuable, not yet valuable. But if I write a purchase order, and I'm just going to write my purchase order from scratch here, all right, and just fill out the basics. I'm not going to get too excited about, filling out all the fields. Most people do fill out more fields than what I'm doing here. And I'll go ahead and put in the part number. Most of you wouldn't have 2 fields. That is an extension that we sell that helps with lookups. So, and it's a relevant search, and a product starts with search. I'm not trying to sell that, but if you're interested in it, let us know. Daryl here is on the call, and Shane is. Reach out to them. But if I'm on the entering product in advanced line entry in a purchase order, the tariffs are by default down here in extended view. If I did need to change the code in the purchase order, I can. Now, if you change the country of origin, that line item is not going to have the tariff applied unless you're changing it on all the lines and you're changing it in the headers. So this is something that you need to use your brain about when you're doing it. If you do have the fairly edge case of having you know, a vendor that can ship things from multiple countries, you want to have those on different suffixes of a blanket or different POs altogether. All right. So I'm going to add my line, and then my PO is finished. So click there. And so I'm going to now receive the PO, and this is where the stuff actually starts working. And I've made a simple PO with just one line item, just to keep it simple today. Okay. So click here. I'll just use quick receive. We'll go ahead and put my purchase order in here, and I'll just do a simple full receipt. But in case you were wondering, if I click detail and I go into my line items, which a lot of people do, if I drilled into the line item, the tariff is not visible here. It would be nice if it is, but it is not. It's visible in a lot of other places, but this is an area where you won't be able to see it. Whoops, don't want to do that. I'll just go ahead and click submit, and then we'll do a final update. Just print this to nowhere, and so now my product has been received. So the first thing I want to show you is, let's look at what happened on the general ledger, and I'm just going to do that by going to good old-fashioned journal inquiry. And I'm rarely paying any attention to what journal it opened, so an easy way to find that is I'm just going to go to the most recent one. This is my my own system, my own company, so no one else is using it. Pretty foolproof way for me. Go ahead and click General Ledger, and you'll see that the debit is for the full amount of inventory. So that's the product itself, material itself, and the tariff. And then we've got two credits: liability for uninvoiced inventory, normal, everyday thing that has nothing to do with tariffs, but then it's also a credit to tariffs payable in my GL account 012222. One feature that I do find that a lot of companies, individuals tend to not notice as much as I think they should is on a receiving journal. You can always look and see what products were received by clicking on inventory control. And the nice thing about tariffs on this is if I drill into my line item on one of the products, I do have visibility to what the tariff and duty, the dollar amount and the percentage right there. And if you do foreign currency, you also see the exchange rate. Okay. So now that that has been received, let's go ahead and take a look at the product itself. So we'll just jump over to, in this case, I'll just go to ICIP. Could go to ICSW too. Just, we'll click here and pull up the warehouse level. Now, if I, if I go to general and I click on balances, I should see that my average cost is no longer $136, $125. It's now $136.125. It updated average cost. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice that my standard cost, which a lot of people use for their sales cost on sales orders, that did not update. That's because standard cost is updated manually or through, uploads by you. So this is a consideration that you need to think about if you use standard cost for margin calculations or sales manager calculations and so on. All right. If I look at the transaction tab here on my product inquiry, this is your transaction ledger card and all of the history, but these little records here have detail. If you drill into them, the tariff information is also here. And that's pretty handy to point out to your folks when they need to figure out what's going on. Giving people access to general ledger journal inquiry is pretty narrow. Not everybody has that, but lots of companies have users with access to product transaction history. And for buyers who need to see it, or for order entry personnel or anybody else that should not have access to general ledger information, this is your friend. This is a very useful screen, right? Okay, so there are some other things I did want to point out here. Tariffs do work with overseas trade. You can't really see the tariffs in the overseas trade screens, but if you had a purchase order that does get received via overseas trade, the same things are going to be visible in product inquiry and so on. All right. Now, one last thing I want to show you really quickly is I'm going to run GLRA really quick. That's our General Ledger Transaction Activity Report. This is probably the main tool that I've recommended over the years for people to use. Now, you could also use a business intelligence tool like, Focus or MITS or whatever you use as a company. However, if you are going to use GLRA, it's a built-in report. I do recommend you have a stored job unless you enjoy filling fields out every time you run it. I'll just, so I have a stored job and I'm just going to run it for everybody. And mine, I filter down by account number. Now, because my tariffs payable account encompasses multiple divisions, I leave the division blank and I'm just filling in my base account. Now, I don't know everybody's charts of accounts on here, but most controllers are pretty loath to have really complicated systems, but you want to narrow this down. And when I run this, I'm just running it for whatever current period I'm in. So you could manually put in date ranges or periods. I tend to just do it this way. It's easier. And click next. And how you fill these out is really sort of up to you. However, I do want to point out there is a big gotcha on GLRA. Many of you know this already. But number 6 here, you want to say yes to that. The default is no. If you say yes, you're going to get pretty much your entire chart of accounts and it'll say no activity. So if you want a 100-page report where you only need a 1-page report, you'll want to say yes. We'll go ahead and click save, let it run. It won't take long. And we'll bring it up here in the viewer. And what this will show you here is, I'll expand it for those of you who have eyes that need it. That would be me. So I've got all of the transactions that have occurred on this account. So this is not the most ideal way if for a subledger type of transaction, because this is a transactional report, but you can see here my receipts are all credits, and my whatever remittances I've made, payments, are going to be debits. Usually those would be coming from accounts payable. And ideally you should be able to tick and tie these and get them all zeroed out to make sure that you're not carrying a balance, positive or negative. And so this behaves a lot like if you do prepaid inventory or something. Many people expense those. It's the same kind of concept. Anyway, so I would like to, so briefly, I'm going to talk about a couple other considerations, and then I'll go ahead and open this up for questions. This is a complicated topic, and I'm certainly not going to make the claim that I've covered every possible scenario. My goal here is to make sure you know they exist and that it is another tool in your toolbox to solve your problems. It's I'm certainly not recommending that it is the be-all catch-all for every scenario that you're encountering. So, but some of the things that have come up for me personally recently, helping out Central Data's clients are, I had, more than one client come to me and say, well, our vendors just charge us a lump sum item at the bottom of the purchase order. And they've just started doing that. They haven't started, factoring it into the cost of the material. Now, what that tells me is your vendors are very similar to the average distributor, where they're getting charged by their vendors, and they're just, so, but if a vendor charges you just a lump sum at line item, and they're not associating the individual percentages or tariff codes to the line items, you have no control over that. But that does give you the opportunity to treat it like an add-on, because you don't know how much is being applied to each line item, and they're the ones taking the hit if they're not compliant. So I would be tempted to do it that way personally. Now, that's up to you, obviously. But if you wish to, in those scenarios, if you're not using the tariff logic, per se, then and if you treat that PO line item is just a labor line or a cost line, you may also need to or desire to pass those charges on to the customers. Now, a lot of people don't realize that it's possible to upcharge products with something called a product surcharge. And when you're looking around and poking around on screens, often you see the acronym DATC, which the average person doesn't know what that means. It doesn't, it really, just we translate that into English into a product surcharge. So they're not the most commonly used thing in the world, so it's something that a lot of people gloss over and don't realize is there. When you use product surcharges, I'm not going to go through all the setups on those today, but they're automatic. That's a very nice thing. However, there's a pretty weird way that they operate as far as cons go. They actually use the GL account of whatever is assigned to add-on number 1 in your ARSS or AP or ARSC record, which is usually inbound freight. So if you're going to try to use product surcharges to pass these types of things on to customers, where if you're not using traditional tariff like I've shown, then you will probably need to figure out what to do with those. All right, with the inbound freight add-on. I've seen some people use labor products to do this, and the pro is it's as easy to add a line item to an order. Everyone knows how to do that. The con is you have to add a line item to the sales order. Adding line items to sales orders is in this context is not usually an automated thing. So, and then some companies, people would use a sales order add-on. That's also commonly used. People understand it. The con is it's relatively manual. I mean, it's not very common that every product you sell is going to have this thing, be this way. So, we'll give you access to this PowerPoint, but I did put the link to that HTS information there for you. That guide is, I think, 4,000 pages long, by the way. All right. So I'd like to go ahead and open this up for questions and go ahead and, so this is complicated topic, so, give it some thought, but go ahead and, start shooting me some questions if you're interested. We got 15 minutes or so to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That was really good. Very detailed. We're not going to open up the audio. We are going to take questions by hand raise, but if you could type those into the chat, that would probably be the best way to submit the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So Shelby, if you're able to chat that into the Q&A or the chat window,
we'll
be happy to address it.
For that. And anybody else? So I see a lot of familiar faces on here, so thanks for joining us, guys. And we'll just go ahead and give it a moment for you to absorb this. But this is an area, by the way, where we have made a significant effort internally here at Central Data to make sure that our support department and our consultants are more conversational on this. This has historically been a fairly unusual topic, sort of an edge case, and it very rapidly became mainstream, as I'm sure everybody here is aware. So, all right. So Shelby, your question was to make it clear again, but what would you like us to clarify? So Shane, since we're not getting overwhelmed, we are there. Hey, you're welcome, David. So
yeah, so we'll
here we go. Here comes Shelby.
We got some applause. Nice job, Scott.
Right.
If there are no more questions, just know all this content will be posted out to Central Data TV, so you can restream it, watch it, share it out on our YouTube channel. And then if Scott does need to dive a little bit deeper, if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us directly and we can coordinate that. But really great stuff today, Scott.
Right. So Shelby said here, if the vendor is billing from the US, but the material comes from China or other, do we have to have ship froms? Well, this all depends on how you are billed and how you wish to document it. So if the vendor is billing you for the tariffs, or if you need to document it for some compliance reasons, you definitely need to have a ship from that matches the country of origin of the product. So yes, I would say in your scenario, Shelby, that you definitely need a ship from. And then Dave here says, if the tariff is on a third-party freight forwarder, is the process the same? Now, Dave, that is the scenario that I worked with when I was an end user. And it is how I tended to focus on it. So the party in your company that is most affected by this is actually your accounts payable department and your finance, crew. So it is more or less the process that I described. Where the difference is, and I did not go into accounts payable parts of this on purpose, is that normally the broker's billing you for all of this. So, hopefully the broker shows you the tariffs as line items so that you can get it set up and documented appropriately. Now, if the broker is sending you, is adding the cost of the tariff into the cost of the line item, just as, and you don't see that broken out, then, you probably could, it's reasonable just to say that the purchase order just needs to represent the replacement cost plus, just represent what the vendor's charging you. So as you can see, this does tend to be different in the various scenarios that you might run across, and not all, freight forwarders and third party companies, it's not the same scenario every time. I've worked with people that have a broker, but the vendor is billing them, or they work with that third party and everything's all in one. So you want to know the answer to that question before you set this up so that you make the system match your reality. And then Chris Donikowski, hi Chris, the last on-prem version requires the vendor country code has to be different than the SASC to calculate the tariff. I don't know. I haven't tested that. I didn't realize that either, but certainly it wouldn't be normal to charge tariffs from, a US to US. So my default position has always been make sure that the country on the vendor or the ship from is different from your main country. It's like foreign currency too. It's not going to calculate foreign currency if they're the same. So you can hit me up, Chris, if you have more questions about that. If Chris also brings up, reminds me that for those of you who know how to write progress code, it's fine. Keeping your tariffs up to date with that type of structure, if you have a developer on staff, is reasonable. For those of you who don't and you feel like you need to do that, please reach out to your partner to get help with those. There are some rules surrounding quick and dirties that do need to be followed. Joe, if we are building an additional line item from our vendor and we set up tariffs as a calculate average cost, is there going to be issues during costing with the vendor invoice? The answer is yes. You have to train your accounts payable people how to handle that. So they would need to, pay for the material against the PO as normal and then expense the tariff amount as it is represented on the invoice. So again, you definitely want to know how your vendors handle this. And this brings back that point that I've made a couple of times is, understanding how you get billed should be affecting how you set these up. And definitely if they're doing separate line items, if you can see the tariff code and you know what it is, handling it that, then accounts payable is going to, expense the tariff amount. If the vendor is rolling it all up and giving you one lump sum, then it's just a regular old trade payable. All right. If you decide to break it out a little bit, there might be some funky nuances that you might want to do. But Joe, you should be talking to, Mike Giuliano about that. You're an Action customer. So, and he knows how to do this, and he'll be able to help you there. So, okay. Let's see, we have any more in the Q&A and not the chat? Nope. Okay, so any other last minute questions from anybody?
Going
well, I've
once.
enjoyed. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, guys. I've enjoyed doing this.
Everyone.
Have a wonderful day.